Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Obsessed live show, coming to you straight after my dinner time and from my bedroom, which is always a really good place to do an interview. Tonight, I'm really excited to be speaking to Robert Mclellan. He's a proud Gooreng Gooreng and Taribelang man who was born on the traditional lands of his ancestors, which we know of as Bundaberg. He works with an organisation called Stepping Black, and he's a really strong advocate for truth-telling and speaking up for Aboriginal people's rights and justice, economic advancement, arts, culture, and ensuring Aboriginal people's representations and voice are authentically valued across all levels of society. Robert, I'm really excited that you've joined me tonight. How are you going?
I'm good. Good evening, and thank you for having me tonight.
Oh, you're very welcome. I think this is, given, let's not just jump straight in, like there's no other way to go. We've seen throughout the world, particularly in America, people protesting and rioting, which is crazy for Black Lives Matters. And then we had protests here in Australia, tens of thousands of people. Is that the right way for us to be having a conversation about something so important, or is there a more effective way that we can get the message across that, we need to be thinking more serious about these topics?
Look, it's certainly one way to raise awareness globally. The important thing, though, is how that is received, and that it's received the way that it was intended to. Like, this is a global movement. I went down to Brisbane a few weeks back to march with the Black Lives Matter movement, and I did that with my cousins and 30,000 other people. But I was marching for, the reason why I was marching was for the 432 deaths in custody that had gone on since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody in 1991. That's why I was marching, but people in America were marching for another reason. But we can all draw a similarity to this, and it is to do with the brutality and the involved, how Black people, for the to coin that phrase that they're using, how Black people are treated in custody, and it's certainly not fair for any. Take that word out. It's not fair for anyone to be treated like that in custody. So I was marching for my people and many other Indigenous Australians across the country. I'd like to, though, before I go on any further, acknowledge that I am just one voice among many. I do not speak for others. So when I speak, I'm coming from my background and my circumstances as to why I see the world in this way.
Absolutely. And I think I ask questions from the same point of view, and I think we're just lucky to be having this conversation openly, and I'm glad that you acknowledge that, because my questions aren't coming from any particular side, or apart from, I think I said before I talked to you before we came live, is I'm just curious and I want to know how I can be a better human being. And if that means that you and I can have this conversation so other people can learn the same thing, then that's a good thing.
Well, when we marched, and I'm really grateful to be on this show, because it seems like a really an awesome space to actually have a good conversation, and I really believe that that's what it's about. You see, we're marching with the rallies. We're marching for a purpose, and then we jump on media and we see that it has been sideswiped by all these other hidden agendas. And in that case, in that circumstance, then the Black Lives Matter movement isn't successful to those who aren't prepared to actually research it and work out why. Why are they marching? However, then what happens is we get this mix of opinions on Facebook, and we get people just throwing all these random things in to try and cite anger and mixed emotions on the matter, and it's just this awful mess. and we've never given the opportunity to actually have a proper conversation as to why we're doing this. So that's sort of one of the things I'm trying to steer clear of when I'm going on Facebook. Is I'm seeing a lot of people coming up on Facebook, and I'm going, you're not getting it. You're just not getting it. So we do need to have a conversation about this with the right people, and we need to make sure that people's voices are heard. And we do need to have a look at our history. And even if that's the last 29 years since that Royal Commission was done, or if it's our 232-year history as a colonized country.
Because I think I'm a little bit older than you, and, if we're talking about history and we're going back to primary school, then we don't actually really learn much about the Indigenous people of Australia beyond. It's almost like and this happened. Yet we focus a lot on, the discovery and the colonisation. And how important is it for us to be able to have ongoing conversations, to actually spend some time really looking at what happened, not the glossy, version that makes everyone comfortable?
Well, those conversations are important because it's starting to allow us as Australians to connect with each other and everyone in the country to understand what our history was. There's no glossing over that horrible things happened, but it's not about taking the blame for anything that has happened from people's ancestors. They always say, I didn't do it, and it's certainly not about taking pity on our people for enduring that. We're still here today. Adaptability, resilience, and belonging. That's why we're here today. But those conversations are integral to our success as a nation together, because we can get, once we have had those conversations, well, then we're going to understand each other better as human beings and as what our country is. And then we can take pride in that, of how far we can come, how far we have come, but we're not there yet. But I want to go back to the importance of school, schooling. I'm not like really old, but it wasn't a very long time since I was in primary school too, but we didn't learn the history like that. I'm pretty proud, though, that now the Australian curriculum has been revised over time, and there's so much opportunity now for those things to be embedded in the classroom. How well that happens across places is another thing. Some do it really well. Some are still kind of getting it. With Stepping Black Indigenous Corporation, I run a program called Together in Education, and that program solely focuses on working with teachers to embed the Indigenous perspectives of the curriculum into the classroom, and the children love it. It's opportunity for that curiosity to happen and those conversations to start. And you see like young black fellas sitting in the class, and they just sit up so tall and proud, and they're like, they can lead their friends through this, and it's a topic where it's so empowering to see, So the tide is changing for that that part. At least we've got children who are growing up now who are having those diverse conversations and understanding different perspectives to shape what kind of human being they become when they're an adult. The unfortunate thing, though, is then we turn on the TV and we hear some of our leaders say some pretty ignorant things, like you would remember, Annette, not long ago, like only a few days ago, our Prime Minister coming out and boldly saying there was no slavery in Australia. Now, I live in Bundaberg, and you've only got to drive from where I live. You've only got to drive 10 kilometres to the beach, and you will see the long walls, volcanic rocks made the long walls that were built by the South Sea Islander people who were blackbirded over here. There's graves, mass graves from, you know, to do with that. They brought them out to cut cane. Like Bundaberg is a living, breathing example of slavery. But I suppose if our leaders don't understand that, who do we look to? Do we look to our children coming up through the school who are becoming the new adults? Where do we look to, you know?
Well, it almost seems to me like we kind of have to start afresh, because like I heard our Prime Minister, sometimes I hate going our Prime Minister because I really don't want to own him, but the Prime Minister of Australia say such an ignorant thing, and you're like, you're meant to be learned and sophisticated in the world, and you've just alienated so many people who have contributed to making Australia what they are. So I wonder with education and racism is that if we show children and we teach them that, you know, each of our contribution to this society that we live in is valued, that might smooth the path for future generations. Because isn't racism born from ignorance and misunderstanding?
Absolutely. And the only way to combat racism and ignorance is through education. Education, we have, racism is a learned tool. No one's born racist. You see children playing together, and there's no sort of understanding of that concept of being any different, you know. It's that human-like connection which is so important. How do we drive forward to a cohesive community when we don't have leaders who can enable that? So you have a comment like that. All these comments come from that one particular leader, and then you watch the people fight. You watch the people fight about intricate things, and all of a sudden we have lost the true meaning of the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, I was seeing that hashtag All Lives Matter. Absolutely, every single life matters. But time and time again, we are reminded that all lives matter unless you're gay. All lives matter unless you're black, unless you have drug problems, unless you're suffering from mental health. So there's all of these particular stipulations as to what all lives matter. We know that. We all know that. The reality is, though, it's Black lives at the moment who are calling out for help, and for us all to be there together, we need everyone to see that, and I suppose then we can drive forward to that cohesive community. I look at New Zealand, and I just am so envious of how they embrace their culture, but they've been doing it for years. I would love to see us take a step in their direction. Maybe
you never know. New Zealand might become a superpower because they just seem to be so progressive with so many aspects of, pardon me, creating that societal cohesiveness.
And look, how do we as a country become progressive to push forward to that sort of cohesive nation where we all get along together and we embrace our whole culture? You know, I've got to firstly say that yes, I am Gooreng Gooreng and Taribelang man, but I'm also Italian and I'm also Scottish. I need to embrace every aspect of what makes me human. But on the flip side, to step forward, we need to realize that Black Lives Matter and stamping out racism along every turn, non-Indigenous people aren't losing anything. You know, every turn we got the introduction of native title. People thought that blackfellas were going to come and take your backyard and take your house, and you'd lose all these things. You know, you're not losing anything. You're only gaining. With anything that we progress forward to, you're only gaining. You're not losing anything. So I think that's probably one of the things. And remember too, ignorance also incites fear. People get scared about these things because they don't know. It's the fear of the unknowing. You know, what's gonna happen? Are these black fellas gonna start to, you know, how well is that gonna be for us? Like, But
I can see your frustration with that, and I feel you, because I look at, I mean, like, I have a totally different experience to you. I'm a white fellow, but I'm a middle-aged woman who is now almost invisible to marketers and advertisers. And, you know, I go up to a counter and it's like eyes just slide over you, and we all have different experiences of being human. And I always think it's really sad that we can't see the samenesses. That's not even a word, but, you know, the similarities. It's late, Robert. I'm allowed. It's past my bedtime. Those similarities that actually make us connected. Let's go back to Black Deaths in Custody. You know, in the 1990s, as you said, they had the Royal Commission into Black Deaths in Custody. There were a whole heap of suggestions and changes that were meant to be handed down. What's gone wrong? Why is this continuing to happen in a country like Australia?
I suppose one of the problems there is, like anything, we have a Royal Commission, so we don't go back down that path again. And if something happens, we handle it in a much more effective way. Now, 339 recommendations were made from that, from the Royal Commission in 91. Now, state by state, they had started to implement that into their police services. However, you go back and you look at the data on that, and each state has done that in their own way. So some have done a little bit, some have done a little bit more. There are recommendations there that states haven't done at all, and that some have just done it in a roundabout way in their own way. So this was never actually enforced as a well, it was never made enough of a priority. So, you know, who knows at the time, what was it, just something to have and then we just forget it? But my concern now is that those 339 recommendations made 29 years ago are maybe, some of them are possibly not relevant anymore in the way police do things. So it's probably time, well, it's not probably, it's certainly time with this movement that every state has a review into their police departments and as to how they have, you know, how well have they met these 339 recommendations, and actually reassess that. And then possibly once that's done, can our whole nation then, all states, combine and say, well, what is not relevant anymore and what is something that we need now that was not included back in 91? Because we all know that as time goes on, 29 years is a long time. We've had a lot of changes in 29 years.
Oh, my goodness. 29 years ago, we didn't have iPhones or Facebook or, you know,
I want to say
coloured shoes.
on that note, I said 432 deaths in custody, but the day before we marched, there was one more death in custody over on the northeast of Perth. An Aboriginal man died while in custody, so pushed it up to 433. That didn't hit the media until after the march, however. But you know, these numbers, take the 432 deaths in our jails. Now that is a state institution. Let's go to a classroom. Let's go to a school. What would our outlook be if 433, you know, children had died in a school since 91? It would be ridiculous. The reality is, regardless of the circumstances leading up to any individual being incarcerated, the system had a duty of care to hold them in incarceration and also to make sure that they were kept alive. Now, they have failed their duty of care. There is no doubt about that, regardless of all of the things that had happened or led up to that. And we also too know that people had accidents or fell downstairs, and then you look at then the coroner's report comes back, and they have been brutally beaten, and you see the internal organ damage and the disgusting things that have happened to these bodies. They're not accidents, we know that. We need a real cleanup.
We need a real cleanup.
We wouldn't accept it in a school. We wouldn't accept it in any other state institution. So why are we allowing it to slide?
And that's, I think, the $1 million question, isn't it, is why are we allowing this? And I guess that's why that opportunity that we had to protest, that it's something that the world is talking about and we can shine the light on it again. Because I guess when you brush things under the carpet and you minimise it, which I think is what's happened over the years, it's like, you know, it's just a black fella will be right. We'll just sweep that under the carpet, that we stop taking action because we're so easily distracted, aren't we? Like something new will pop up and we're like, oh, let's go over here and focus on that. What would you like to see happen? Like, what's something that tangible that they can make changes right away that would make a difference?
Well, I'd like to see state leadership on that matter, and start to, you know, do a review into how well they have implemented those recommendations, and as to what needs to change there. It needs to be done independently too. It needs to be driven that way too, because we can't have the police policing the police, you know, because like it brings back to that thing, like how are we we have young people marching now, but you know, we're marching against the police. I mean, I will say hands down, the Brisbane, when we marched in Brisbane, I was overwhelmed with the support that I found the police there sort of did. You know, they were walking alongside people. They had stuff there. They had signs on police cars. Like, that was nice to see. But the young people walking, they're really, how do we as young people grow and go into that next phase to actually take leadership when we're caught at a dichotomy, I suppose, between what is morally and ethically right and what is actually the legislated law. We're seeing inconsistencies there. I suppose just because it's legal does not mean that it's right ethically or morally. We've had a lot of things done in the name of the law across the 232 years of colonization that are not morally or ethically appropriate, certainly not. I suppose that's one of the things we need to do. One of the other things I would like to see, and I spoke with my uncle greatly about this, is a Truth and Justice Commission for that looks into the mistreatment of Aboriginal peoples across that 232-year period. That will give justice for those people. Well, that's the intention of it, and then we can sort of start to move forward from there. I suppose one of the things I would like to also see when we look at Aboriginal communities is trauma-informed decisions. We have people making decisions about those communities who have no understanding of where their background or where they have come from. As with Stepping Black, we do a lot of work out in the North and South Burnett, and if you don't know, the South Burnett, there's one of Queensland's first Aboriginal missions was set up there, called Cherbourg. So, and we also have there's Aboriginal communities up the road from it as well. So we have people living in communities who are needing assistance, who are needing services and stuff, but then we're having conversations about them that certainly aren't aren't sort of relevant for their best interests. So we're sort of struggling with that. I heard, and I don't really want to talk about it too much because it's really not worth the time. But we have, I was looking last night at Jacinta Price talking, and she is the go-to blackface for any media outlet wanting to run blackfellas down. And there's this perception there that it's okay because we've got our blackfella friend who's going to say the things that we want them to say. And again, like I said at the start, and I'll say it about her, she absolutely does not represent the views of the majority of Aboriginal people in the country. And that's really unfortunate. And it's unfortunate that disconnection is there.
And that's a good point too, Robert, is this, that we need that diversity of spokespeople across the media, across government, across business, that, you know, you can't just keep going to the same person just because it's easy.
And that's the thing, is we are plugging towards we're pushing towards a way that we can firstly have justice. Anyone would want justice. If you can put yourself in those shoes, who have suffered, who have maybe been directly involved with a family member who died in custody, you would definitely want justice for your family, regardless of the color of your skin. We will need to push forward for people to seek that justice. But then it also, if we have the correct leadership there, we can have those conversations that, one, educate everyone in our country, black and white, about both, and we can start to work towards that cohesive community that is connected and that is a little bit less disconnected. But the divisive language needs to stop when we see leaders talking. We need leaders to, I suppose, have a bit of to sort of come onto a similar page when we're talking about what is the right way forward in general and what is the right way forward for blackfellas as well. I've just seen so many leaders step up and start to advocate for Aboriginal rights, and then they sort of get taken under, government absorbs them and puts them in a position and tells them to be quiet, and then we lose another good leader because they've silenced. Yeah, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and like I've been involved in many bureaucracies and particularly political parties, and you see people with really good intentions who are really honourable go in for the right reasons to go, you know, I'm going to go in and change, and they get swallowed up by factions and backstabbing and political, you know,
I really believe at the start, a lot of people start with that intention to do good, to bring about change. That's why they get into politics. And then unfortunately, by the end of it, they're just self-serving politicians who only care about themselves. And
yep.
who do not want to learn, who don't want to learn about our history, who want to play one against the other. And I suppose if those people, regardless of your cultural background, if those people can, firstly, rewind 300 years, what country would you authentically connect to? And as I've acknowledged my European ancestry, but if we can acknowledge that within ourselves first, we start within ourselves, then if we can acknowledge our country's history and not be afraid of the unknown, that, oh, we hear these horrible things and we're going to all crumble. It's going to educate us. It's going to make us smarter. We are going to progress forward together. If we can have those conversations, then we can move forward together. And I suppose one of the other things there is, you know, acknowledge the fact that Aboriginal people have been sustainable on this land for up to 80,000 years now. And they are the longest continuing living people in the world. And that doesn't happen just by luck. There's a lot of sophisticated methodologies there that enable a culture to be so sustainable. So if we're upset about how our land's been treated, I think we need to look at the Aboriginal perspectives on a lot of things as well and see how the two marry together.
I remember reading a lot about that during the bushfires and how Aboriginal people used to manage the bush back before we had fire engines and hoses, and it was through this process of backburning. And I guess it, you know, like I've been noticing a lot in, you know, conversations I've been having, you know, those old wives' tales that used to be, you know, poo-pooed by certain generations and going, that would never work because that's just not, you know, that's not science, or it's not the way we do things. But there's so much practical wisdom and proof that it works. And it almost seems like we're stupid to ignore it.
Well, it is a science, you know, and I don't understand how we can't see that if we share information, if we share knowledge together, how that's not going to make us smarter.
I loved your point before about how by acknowledging or giving to one group is not necessarily means that it's taking away from the other, that it can be a win-win. So Robert, can you tell me, as a white person, so I've not experienced racism. I mean, like, I've experienced different things in my life, but I've never been judged in my own country by the colour of my skin. What can people like me, who feel so strongly and love our fellow human beings, that are just abhor what they're seeing, how can we make a difference? What can we do to help in this fight to get justice and have that cultural inclusion to be just the norm in our country?
I want to say one thing. It is the hot topic, but just going off what you've said, everyone hears this word and they throw their hands up into the air and they don't want to face it. It's like, no, 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 no. The word I want to say is, and I say this very respectfully, is acknowledging the white privilege. And it's going, oh, well, I'm not privileged. I had a hard life. That's okay. Acknowledging white privilege means that your life hasn't been made any harder due to the color of your skin. That is all that is saying. It's not taking away any disadvantage from you that you've taken, but acknowledging that there is an imbalance. That's why we say white privilege. It seems to be a trigger word, but
people think it's an insult, don't they?
They do think it's an insult, but the purpose of it is to acknowledge that there is an imbalance. And when you can personally acknowledge there is an imbalance, then you can, and if you have a strong sense of right and wrong, and and for equality and for us to progress to an equitable future, then you can start to change the language that we use, change the sort of things we engage in more things that are appropriate, and we can start to bridge that gap. So really closing the gap is really so broad. But that's probably, I think, where it needs to start within yourself, and to authentically want to bring change because you believe it's the right thing to do.
I love that. And I think that there's such wisdom, because until we acknowledge where we stand in the whole scheme of things, we can't be open to hearing the possibilities. And I know in my family we've had very long and heated discussions about white privilege. I have a 19-year-old son who thinks he's hard done by, and it's kind of my youngest son looks at him and goes, I think that's what privilege is, Mum. And it's like, yeah, you should come to our house for dinner. It's like very entertaining. But and I think too, also important is, and you said most respectfully, I say this, is that we have to acknowledge that we're not being insulted when somebody says, hey, check your privilege, or, and you said it very respectfully, is that until we stop seeing everything as a attack on us and our position, then it's very hard for us to move forward. And I say us as a collective. So, Robert, look, I really appreciate your time tonight. I know that you work hard, and I want to thank you. I think you're an incredible leader, and I really look forward to the changes that you make. And I hope that you've got a friend with us at Obsessed With, and if we can ever be of service, please just let us know. It's been a privilege to talk to you tonight.
Can I leave you with one thing to mull over the next few weeks?
Please.
And I love sharing this one. This was my Uncle Grant told me this, and I thought this is an old Aboriginal way, and it really encapsulates everything that we do in the world, and that is sharing, caring, and respect for the land, the environment, and the people. And if we can do those maybe basic things, we can't really go wrong. But have a think about that: sharing, caring, and respect for the land, the people, and the environment. But thank you very much for having me.
I love that. Thank you. You are so welcome. Thank you. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.